Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today we will be discussing self-compassion, acknowledging that we are human. Let's reflect. If your friend got a C plus on a paper they worked hard on, would you say, should have worked harder? Next time, let someone smarter than you edit it. I guess you're stupid. Would you say that to a good friend? I imagine that you wouldn't, because what do these statements sound like? Harsh criticism. It's unnecessary because the damage has already been done. They may have worked as hard as they could, and C plus is a combination of many different factors, some of them outside of themselves. So if you wouldn't say this to your friend, would you say this to yourself? Because these are things that you might say to yourself. Have you ever said to yourself, you're stupid? Have you ever said to yourself, you should have worked harder? There are, of course, some cases where we could have worked harder, but we didn't based on whatever was going on for us, based on our capacity at the time. So just remember to be careful because you are listening. So these messages that you tell yourself, and even the messages you tell others, your brain, your body is also listening. So what is compassion? It is a deep sympathy and connection to the suffering of others. It is the wish to alleviate their suffering, mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. You know compassion when you see it, right? Think back to an experience where someone lent you a hand or leaned into your experience, leaned into your feelings, did a sympathetic head tilt to show that they were listening with you to those feelings and to your experience. So we know compassion when we see it out in the world. So are we seeing it for ourselves? Are we making compassion happen for ourselves? So the origins of the word are interesting. It's the Latin root for the word compassion, and it's pati, which means to suffer, and the prefix com, which means with. So compassion, originating from compati, literally means to suffer with. So the connection of suffering with another person brings compassion beyond sympathy into the realm of empathy. So it's not just caring in a pitying sort of way for somebody, it's caring in a way where you're with them in that feeling, and that is what empathy is. So compassion is literally to suffer with. So just a reminder that the material that we'll be talking about today could be activating for many reasons. So I'm just asking for your informed consent, check in with yourself and your heart. There's no judgment here about your inner dialogue. We're just trying to raise awareness of it and to reflect on our inner dialogue, as well as the things you might say to others. Sometimes we are harsh to others, often because we are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. We are all in a different place on our journey, on our path. And wherever that is okay, because that is where you're at in the moment. And so just remember to reflect in this workshop, but be very careful of your inner critic in that dialogue. So what is self-compassion? We know compassion outwards when we see it, because again, we would never say to a friend, you're stupid, but we say it to ourselves. So how do we turn that compassion we have to others inward? Self-compassion is loving and understanding yourself with your flaws. Again, acknowledging that you are human, acknowledging the courage you have to manage in these uncertain times and the times coming next. That requires self-compassion. Instead of seeing that you are flawed, see that the COVID situation is flawed. This is called externalizing. So instead of measuring yourself in a way where you don't measure up and you're taking everything that's happening out in the world into an internal, very personal, very individualized place, just remember the context in which we're living right now and in the future as things changes, because are we ever going to have a time in our lives that is entirely free from stress? I wish that for you, but instead we're managing with all the stressors in our lives. So if we externalize this a bit and think, I did my best amongst these circumstances, then it helps to take the pressure off, and it's honestly more realistic. So on the right, you'll see an image of a bowl with some cracks in it, and there's been gold placed into the cracks. And maybe you've seen this before. In Japan, broken objects are often repaired with gold. The flaw is seen as a unique piece of the object's history, which adds to its beauty. I just want you to consider this when you feel broken or that you don't measure up, is that we can actually celebrate that as adding to the diversity of human experience. So self-criticism is more than just an honest reflection, like, oh, I could have worked harder on that. Next time I should spend more time on it. That would be an honest reflection. But self-criticism is a dangerous state where we critique and criticize ourselves. And we're really just beating ourselves into a pulp, kind of pushing ourselves down. Honestly, for most of us, doesn't the world do that enough? Can we figure out ways that we can move from self-criticism, self-hatred to honest reflection and self-compassion? So it's not your fault. We're in a context in our lives that have evolved as humans that we're actually wired for this self-criticism in a way, because we are wired to find risk and to assess and judge. So all of those incredible survival skills to find risk and assess and judge our surroundings, the animals around us, the capacity to get food for ourselves and our community, we were wired to survive with those. But when there isn't a real risk, and I'm using quotes on that because there is lots of risk in our lives, but I mean, there's no saber-toothed tiger right now. So then we use all of our brain power to find risk and assess and judge, to find any risks in ourselves, any judgment in ourselves. We assess ourselves and the world around us, and we exploit our flaws. We just focus in on our flaws because our brain is wired to look for saber-toothed tigers. Without the saber-toothed tiger, we find the saber-toothed tiger within. And it's usually, I'm not enough. Depression and self-hatred are enemies of a good life. And what you look for, you find. So if you look for evidence that you are not enough and you are stupid and you are worthless and you are alone in the world, you will find that, because whatever direction you're pointed in, each step you take is within that direction. So if you directed yourself in a different, more healthy, more honest, more reflective, more self-compassionate direction, every step you would take would be in that direction. And you would look for evidence that it's okay to make mistakes. You would look for evidence that said you did your best and that is good enough. Look at the context in the world around us and look within the capacity of yourself to manage the stressors that you have. So what you look for, you find. So eventually you have to make the decision to stop looking for evidence that you aren't enough. Because the truth is, no matter who you are, you have value intrinsically within you, and you are enough. So be your own best friend, the same way that you would be compassionate to somebody suffering out in the world, whether that's getting a low mark or not feeling like they accomplished enough this year, or with dealing with grief and loss. Whatever it is that you would say to a friend, practice saying that to yourself. So brainstorm with yourself. If your friend was having a hard day, what would you say to them? How would you support them in having a hard day? Acknowledging that they have stressors in their lives that they're doing their best to manage. So maybe write down some thoughts in your journal, some notes in your phone. What would you say to a friend having a hard day? Okay, so what is self-compassion? We're putting these pieces together. It's okay to make a mistake. You're human. It's okay to mess up. We're all flawed. There's a common humanity in the fact that we all make mistakes. No one is perfect. Sometimes our self-criticism and that inner critic says, be perfect. But again, if we externalize that a little bit, if we zoom out and look further, no one is perfect. Nothing is perfect. And isn't that great? Isn't that really a gift? We can celebrate the diversity of experiences in every way, including flaws and mistakes and the grit of human experience. So take the compassion, understanding, and kindness you have for others and aim it towards yourself. Are you going to wake up tomorrow morning and be able to have shifted all of that compassion outwards, inwards? Probably not. But if you just want to try and practice, because this is a practice, maybe 10% of the compassion you put out in the world, try to put it to you first. It'll actually make you more compassionate to others as well. So if your inner critic right now is telling you it's selfish to be compassionate to yourself, I just want you to reflect on that and try to counter that by saying, I can be more compassionate, more present to others if I am whole with myself first. So here's a self-compassion exercise. So you can write along, you can use this as an exercise in your journal, or you can just reflect thinking about it, in a brainstorming kind of way. So you can either catch the self-criticism or self-hatred as it comes up, or you can do this preventatively by trying to constantly practice self-compassion so that when you're in a moment that you would normally criticize yourself, you might actually be able to move through that quicker, and again point yourself in the direction towards self-compassion and understanding, towards the fact that you're human. So in your phone, paper, wherever, take notes and work through something for you. Come up with something that you feel was not good enough. It could be a failure, a mistake, something you made recently, something that didn't go your way that you were really disappointed about. Just have a think about what that could be. So for example, I will tell you a real life experience. And I'm using a small kind of not spicy example, just so that we can work through it. I double booked myself for a professional development day and missed an important meeting. So I had to do two things at the same time. I didn't schedule them appropriately. I was actually ended up being surprised by something that I had heard about weeks ago because I wasn't organized enough. And normally that's really upsetting to me because number one, I missed out on something. Number two, I worry about how that looks, about how organized I am, and a lot of other things that come with it. So that's the example that I'm going to ask you to work through. I'm going to give you examples of it. So step one, what were you trying to do, right? When you look back at the thing that you are reflecting on, the mistake that you made, look at the task you tried to achieve. Was it a normal task? Was it no biggie? Or were you trying to climb a mountain? So the first thing we have to figure out is put in the context again of what was going on. What were you supposed to do? Because sometimes we set ourselves up to climb a mountain and we didn't have the equipment. So then can we be that disappointed that we didn't make it up? And if it was a normal task, but if we zoom out a bit and we think, what else is going on for me right now? Sometimes a normal everyday task, even something like taking a shower or calling somebody back, becomes a mountain, okay? So if you've made mistakes or even failed, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. Zoom out to look at the situation more clearly to see that it was a hard task. Even that small thing could be a hard task amidst this context. So failure is always an option, right? There is no perfect. That means we can always at some point fail. There's no guarantees to succeed. So I double booked myself for professional development day and I missed an important meeting. So was that a big task? No, right? I should have been able to coordinate my schedule. But if I zoom out, was it a big task thinking about how much I have to coordinate and how I'm feeling right now and how my brain's actually kind of fuzzy? And so something as simple as organizing things in a schedule has become a mountain. So if I zoom out, it was too much for me to try to keep all of these things in order. So step two, where did you come from, right? We don't exist in a vacuum. We don't get dropped by a storm. We have family histories, and this connects to our complex family traumas. And this might be something you know very clearly about for yourself or something that you don't know for yourself. And trauma might be a big word, so take a deep breath. But I think it's most important to think about family function. How well does your family function? Does your family have secrets? Does your family try to cope? Does your family try to be perfect? Like there is something going on there. This moment in time has been cultivated by all of your past experiences, and you need to share some of the responsibility for today with everyone who came before you in your family. I recommend this book if you're interested in this. So if I go back to my example, I double booked myself for a professional development day and missed an important meeting. Okay, well, where do I come from? My family has a lot of anxiety and is so on top of being on time that they're early in kind of a painful way, like showing up an hour early for something that is really like lo-fi, did not need anyone to arrive that early. And so when I look at that mistake that I made about double booking, in real life, it's not a big deal. I can get the information that I missed. No, this wasn't a life or death situation, but because where I come from made me actually look at this as an incredible failure, because being on time has been such an important value, but it's also been a very anxious response, because some people who want to be on time are using that as a way to control a situation. So if I can't control things out in the world, I can at least control when I arrive to an event. So that might sound helpful because our society views being on time as important, but really it's an anxious response. So I am trying to work through that. So step 3, be critical of the media, be critical of the messages that we receive. This is where we're trying to deal with the idea of perfect. We're trying to counter and challenge that narrative. So don't compare yourself to someone's cultivated public persona, whoever they appear to be on Facebook or Instagram. I know you know this, and I know you do it anyways. Don't compare yourself to others. So I go back to my example. If I compared myself to others, I might think nobody's as disorganized as me right now. Nobody made this same mistake. Everybody else showed up. And I start thinking that everyone else is perfect and I'm flawed and that's bad. And if I just zoom out and I stop comparing myself to anyone else, I practice self-compassion, I think everyone has done this at some point, like it's just a natural part of having a busy schedule. And also, I don't have my own admin assistant. I manage my own schedule and have many tasks. So, I did the best I could under those circumstances. And anyone I'm comparing to that I think has never made this mistake, I'm inflating the image of them, because it's so possible to make this mistake, and that means nothing is wrong with me. So step 4, there are things that are outside and inside of our control. So don't take responsibility for everything. And some things will be our full responsibility, but let's just remember to zoom out and don't take full responsibility for everything. We're not entirely in control, which means we're not entirely to blame. Or you need more time to work on something within your control. So of course, we make mistakes that could have been prevented and are within our control. So let's spend more time and energy thinking like, okay, what was that mistake? How did it happen? And how can I be kind to myself while I try to fix this issue, or while I try to make sure it doesn't happen again? So I'm going to spend that energy with things that are within my control, but there are things that are outside of my control, and I need to recognize that so I don't take it all in. So if there is too much for you that is outside of your control, put it in a container, because we can't deal with all of those things outside of our control. So put all of the things outside of your control in a container. My container is like a sandwich container, like a Ziploc sandwich container from the dollar store. And when there's too much happening out that I cannot control, I just put some of that worry or anger or whatever into a container, and then I try to think about what is within my control and how can I direct myself towards that. And every step I take will be to manage things that are within my control in a healthy way. So if we go back to my example, I double booked myself. What's outside of my control? Well, the amount of things that I have to do is outside of my control. The amount of people that need to access to me, staff and students, things like that, that's outside of my control. So I do my best with that. So what's within my control is I need to slow down, take a breath when I get an email that has a date, and I need to, before I'm multitasking or doing other things, copy and paste links, details, the name of the meeting into my schedule. This is something that I constantly am trying to get better at. Step 5, you are complex. You are not your achievements, which also means that you are not your failures. That's the good news. There are many different parts of you. Bathe in the kindness of others and what people said to you that focused on your whole self. The example I heard the other day was there's this show called Kids Baking Championship on Food Network. Maybe you've seen it. And when you ask these kids that are 11, 12 years old, what are you? They don't say, I'm a baker. They say, I'm a basketball player, I'm a good friend, and I bake, right? Because they are not their careers, because they're 10, 11, 12. But we have a lot to learn from them because they, when asked, who are you, will give many different parts of themselves, including things that they enjoy, as opposed to things that they just accomplish or achieve. And we need to get back to that because that's the truth of our experience. We are complex, we are many different things. So here's an example of my dog. Maybe you've met him. His name is Nico. He accomplishes nothing. He does not contribute very much. I have to clean up after him. I have to pay to feed him, get his tick medication. And he doesn't contribute really. I always say his job is to be cute. Okay. And he does do that very well. But I still love him, even though he is a lot of work because he doesn't have to have a job to be important. He just is important. So you might make a mistake, but that doesn't define you. And you have that intrinsic value. I'm not trying to compare you to a dog, but just like a dog has intrinsic value, which is probably easier for you to see because you're still building your self-compassion. I'm asking you to see that within yourself, that you still have value and that we can think of many ways that you contribute, or we can see that you are so much more than your contributions because the process of being human is worth everything in the world. So step 6 is a deep breath in and an exhalation reminding you you won't always feel this way. This too shall pass. You probably won't care about this forever. I already don't care that I missed a thing that was in February. You know, it might not be as important as you worry about. So in the moment, seeing my mistake, very heightened. And then later, not heightened at all. Now I'm talking about it, no distress, okay? So this moment of crisis will subside. Will it have impact? Yes. Will you learn from it? Hopefully, but it will subside the intensity of the feelings. That's why we need to have compassion for others and be with them in their suffering, because the moment of suffering is intense and it's not always going to be the case. So be with them present in that moment. And then we're just trying to direct some of the compassion we have to others to ourselves. Sometimes you have to reduce your expectations to 0. And maybe COVID is an opportunity for that. Are there things that you just need to take off your list? Let's say you were, what's that called? You know, training for a marathon. I don't even know those words because I would never do that. But let's say you were training for a marathon and then COVID happened and you couldn't be indoor tracks and you didn't have buddies that you could train for a marathon with or whatever it takes to train for a marathon. And you might have scaled that all the way down to 0. It's like, you know what? This year, it's not on my plate. I'm not training for a marathon. And so it's something to do with honest reflection because you need rest. And we have to be kind to ourselves in order to have rest because you deserve rest. And you probably know that for others, but you don't allow yourself to need rest. So sometimes reducing our expectations to 0 where we can, if it's within our control, then it'll help us to rest. So am I doing the best I can in these circumstances? Yes. Wow, good for me. So if I'm thinking back to being kind to the Robin who made a mistake and missed a meeting, was she doing the best that she could? Honestly, yeah, she was doing the best that she could. I wish that she could have not made that mistake, and it's happened before, but she's still working on her organizational skills, and that's not what defines her. She has a lot of great qualities, and that one might not match up. And I'm not reducing it to 0 because I don't need to. It is within my control. I'm going to have an expectation, but I'm going to lose the self-criticism part because you know what? It's just not motivating. Okay, so those are the 6 steps to practicing self-compassion and working something through. So feel free to use that in the future to deal with something that you want to pull apart. Again, self-compassion is a practice. You're not going to wake up tomorrow feeling it in your soul. You're going to have to do the work. You deserve to feel it in your soul, and I encourage you to do so. So you might be asking yourself, how do you balance this with accountability? Because I've been talking about things like it's not your fault, you come from a complex family history. Yes, but being responsible for your actions is 100% important, okay? But if you have no self-compassion, you will not be responsible for the right action. You'll end up beating yourself up so much that when there's an actual issue that someone else brings up, not you this time when you're inner critic, but somebody else brings up, you will be defensive because by that point, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. So hopefully this is starting to make sense to you. Self-compassion can breed accountability. If you can be self-compassionate and be honest and reflect what was within my control, what was my action, if you learn to apologize and be accountable within yourself and with others, then there might be a time when someone comes to you and says, hey, this was an issue, and you'll be able to be present and think, okay, I hear this issue and I hear my self-critic, and I'm going to be self-compassionate and also be accountable for what I've done and try to change. It's going to be a lot healthier and more balanced to do that, as opposed to, like I said, if you treat yourself like a villain every time you do something. If anybody ever calls you out on something, whether it's a small thing or a mountain, you're going to feel like you're a villain, and that is going to be too much. So here's an example. I made a mistake. That's okay. I'm human. I hope to learn from this and not make that mistake again. I did the best with what was going on at the time. This is a learning opportunity. I am not flawed or broken. That's how we put all of those pieces together. And with accountability, we can add, after I've worked through that and done the self-compassion, we can add, and I'm so sorry. I knew better and I should have done better. I won't let this happen again. So hopefully that's starting to make sense. Feel your feelings, right? Be vulnerable. Compassion means to suffer with. So you being present to suffer with other people and make space for their suffering is such a beautiful gift. And we're trying to direct some of that inwards. So be with yourself and your suffering. You're human. Everyone messes up or has a hard time or can't manage or is overwhelmed by stress at some point. Challenge negative thoughts and self-hatred and replace them with kindness. That's the least you deserve in a moment that you're overwhelmed. Zoom out to focus on the reality of the situation. Don't just see the doom and gloom. Self-soothe, give yourself comfort, whatever that means. That might mean self-nourishment. That might mean taking a break, having some rest. That might mean even experiencing joy, giving yourself some space to have joy. Ask for help. Ask for the compassion of others so that you can reflect the compassion within yourself. You are students as well as staff. You can go see a peer supporter. You can go see a counselor. Don't forget to access your resources. So we have evolved as humans, including our brains and our bodies. The most damaging thing we can do for our survival is to be isolated. We have needed to evolve as social beings to be with each other for our survival. It made us stronger to be together. It made it so that we were less vulnerable to the saber-toothed tiger, for example. When we are isolated, we don't survive. So what does this mean for the past year of our lives that was built on isolation? Currently, there's a common human experience of the suffering related to isolation. So trust me that you did your best this year. Whatever it looked like, you did your best this year. Because one of the worst things for us as humans is to be isolated. And we were forced to isolate for a year. So you did your best. Let's put it all together and review. So what is self-compassion? It's a sense of kindness, it's care, it's understanding versus judgment. Understanding where you came from, understanding what happened, understanding the task at hand, versus pure judgment, assessing risk, and being critical, which is not very motivating. Self-compassion addresses the fact that we have a common humanity. So we don't compare ourselves to others and say somebody else is perfect and we hold them up and we're failing and we don't measure up. That's not what we're doing. We're saying all of us as humans are complex, are not defined by our achievements, and we all make mistakes. So common humanity versus isolated from others. There's no such thing as perfect. When we're isolated from others, we think somebody else is perfect because we're not in tune with their lives. So let's be together even in our consciousness. Self-compassion is about mindfulness. It's about making space for suffering. We want to avoid pain. Of course we do. That's a coping skill, but it's helpful until it's hurtful. Self-compassion means turning towards your pain. You may hear many people in many different circumstances say, lean in, right? Lean into discomfort. So self-compassion means to lean in towards your pain in order to give yourself the caring and support you need, which is why it's so important to feel your feeling and make space for other people's feelings as well. So I know you want to avoid, but leaning in is going to be more meaningful. So when do we need to use self-compassion? I'll leave that to you to figure out, but hopefully what you're reflecting on is that we always need self-compassion. We must be patient with ourselves. We're always growing and we deserve the best. So self-compassion is a practice, it's a process. It takes work just as much as meditation and mindfulness takes practice. And it would be very hard to say, I'm not doing a good enough job of being self-compassionate, right? Let's apply a little bit more self-compassion and just say, I'm still learning how to be self-compassionate, okay? So take care of yourself and be self-compassionate because you have been through a lot. So look for something that gives you joy from the past year, something that was even just okay, right? Because even neutrality is more honest than just seeing that this whole year you weren't good enough, because trust me, that's just not true. Even public health has said, if you stayed inside and you survived this year, you did an amazing job. So just putting that out there. Thank you so much for this time. I'm sending you compassion and understanding and inviting you to have self-compassion and understanding within you. You can do it.